Are you frustrated with the existing screenwriting software options that are designed to be a formatting tool and not much else? Well, don't you worry, because screenwriting just got easier. Arc Studio actually understands how screenwriters think, so say goodbye to archaic, outdated screenwriting software and hello to advanced story-building features, industry-standard automatic formatting, and stress-free collaboration tools that are as easy to use as Google Docs. Arc Studio offers a completely free plan, and you can get $30 off the Pro plan if you visit the link in the show notes or head to arcstudiopro.com/booby. That's BOOBI for breaking out of breaking in. I repeat, for $30 off, visit arcstudiopro.com/booby. On with the show.
Hey, I'm Christina Ray, and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Brie Castellini, your other co-host, and today we're breaking down the craft of production design, among other things, with guest Raymond Carr. Before we dive in, remember that we release bonus content for each and every episode of this podcast over on patreon.com/breakingoutpod if you want to support us and get yourself even more info and resources. But without further ado, welcome Raymond.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're so glad you're here. Raymond and I met because we were connected via the Starable Fest folks to do an event at their first Los Angeles event. And I had such a great time talking to him and was so fascinated by his work in production design, in puppeteering, and sci-fi that we knew we had to get him on the podcast. So Raymond, introduce yourself a little bit. Who are you? What do you make?
Oh my gosh, such existential questions at the top. Yeah, I'm a freelance artist. I'm a filmmaker and production designer. I'm also a creature effects puppeteer, working with the Jim Henson Company as well as other production companies around town, and specifically, making my own content with my production company, Ninja Puppet Productions. We build props and sceneries and also make films when I can. And the film that I was out there for Starable was a film called Joyriders that has been doing its festival run. It's kind of at the end of the festival run and now can be found on Roku, thanks to Starable. We've won some awards with them, which was great. So yeah, Joyriders is a story about three kids from the hood who accidentally find an alien spaceship and take it on a joyride through Atlanta, and eventually have to come back home and realize what they're going to do with their newfound abilities and treasures. So yeah, it turned out really great with the help of a couple hundred people from the Atlanta area and around the world, because we also participated in Seed and Spark for a crowdfunding thing. So yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Very cool stuff.
Very
yeah, we're
cool.
Definitely going to get into Joyriders and everything about that. But I want to start zooming out a little bit. So how did you originally get into production design, creature design, and all this cool visual stuff?
Yeah, that's always the big question. How did I get myself into this mess? I mean, I was a theater kid, was planning on doing theater and specifically doing puppets. I'd been doing puppets with my family and theater for most of my life. And then I started doing productions out here in Atlanta, where I am based. There's a place called the Center for Puppetry Arts, which is the country's largest puppetry theater and museum. And they have the largest collection of like the Jim Henson works and a lot of other amazing things. Multi-million-dollar facility, which I highly recommend everybody check out when they get a chance. Also, I have an exhibit now. They're featuring my work in their collection, a part of the museum, which is cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks. So, I was doing theater, and then I realized that the rest of my castmates at the age of 17 all had like master's degrees in theater and everything. And I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't go to college for theater, try something else. And so I started switched over to film and got involved, was lucky enough to find a local theater that had a film collective called Dailies. And it was just a bunch of film nerds who wanted to make some films. And our motto was Dailies was a safe place to fail. And we made some pretty good content that came out of that. We gave ourselves short film challenges, and we'd share resources and have different forms of collaborations throughout the filmmaking process for each quarter. And from that, we made a film called The Signal, which went to Sundance and did really well. And then the relationships that formed out of that, we made another film called VHS, which is a whole found footage horror series, a bunch of other stuff. That's kind of how that became my film school, really, that group of people and those folks. Yeah. And because I had a theater background and I could build stuff, people were just like, "Oh, your art department." And I'm like, "I don't know what that is, but okay." So I was just everybody's art department in our short film collective. And then I ended up joining the IATSE union and started going down that rabbit hole.
That's amazing.
Very cool.
And so at what point did you get like officially trained for puppeteering and working with the Henson Company?
So yeah, I started working with the Henson Company in 2015. They had a series of workshops that was just where they were just looking for new talent. And so I was able to, they had a couple hundred people, like 500 people apply for that. And they selected some folks out of that. And so that started my relationship with them. And, I had a background already with animatronics and creature effects, working with Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, Nick Jr., a bunch of other stuff. So I already had a background in all that. And so that's kind of how I was able to move forward working with them in some of their more technologically sophisticated programming. So yeah, it's been they're a really great company to work with when I can, and they do make cool stuff.
Totally. No, that's amazing. Okay. So obviously you're like a very tactile person, you can build things, you have a background in it, and having seen your work, I can see how like tactile your design sense is. So when somebody is bringing you in on a project that's not yours, like they're just hiring you as a production designer, as an art department head, what are like the first things you're looking for in the script, in your meeting? Like where do you start having that conversation with a new team?
It depends on the scale of the thing. I'll just speak to the indie space specifically.
Sure.
It's all in the script. Usually, hopefully, on the indie level, you've had some sort of conversations with the director and producers on what you are trying to achieve. And people usually come to me when there is the weirder stuff. And, they're not going to get me to, design a posh hotel or something like that.
Sure.
They'll have me do the trash compactor and other shit like that. So, we try and synthesize the look and feel of the project. Pinterest is my best friend, just putting together just mood boards as much as possible, just to try and get a sense of what the director is looking for. It's not this, it's that kind of a thing. And a lot of times knowing what they don't want is as informative as anything else. So outside of the script, it's really just trying to narrow down some sort of visual language for the tone. I mean, tone is another big thing, obviously, not just like, is it a comedy or drama, but like, is this world our world, or is it a magical world, or what levels of reality are we dealing with on this kind of space? So yeah, that's kind of where we go. And then from there, we kind of, particularly on the indie level, we shoot for the moon, but then we have these small concessions that you're constantly making. And so I like to bake those concessions into the system at the beginning, meaning if it is a story that takes place in the future, maybe it's not the cleanest portion of the future, or maybe it's a different section of the future where we're only showcasing a small area of it. And then, the wide shots can be visual effects or miniatures or what have you, or something like that. Making sure that we're being strategic about what we're showing, because presumably the budget isn't fully there. So, and then also getting in on the ground floor with the script and saying what can be done and what we could do that might not look as good as they want. So maybe we cut the flying saucer and skyscraper and all that kind of stuff,
What kind of questions are you asking from people who maybe don't have the same like production design vocabulary? Because that's always something, especially in indies, when you're working with someone new, where it's like they don't really know what to ask for. They have an idea of their story, but they don't know how to ask you to bring it to life. So like, what are you using in those conversations to kind of pull it out of them?
I think it has a lot to do with their frame of reference.
Okay.
Obviously we work in cinema, so trying to get a sense of the kind of cinematic language that they're trying to use or cinematic references that they're trying to use. So we talk speaking broadly and then narrowing it down. So, it's not Spielberg, it's Cronenberg, or it's not, it's Evil Dead Sam Raimi's, not Marvel Sam Raimi, this kind of stuff. Trying to get those ideas narrowed down. Like I said, just trying to put all of that information, synthesize that information as best possible. And also, like I said, having those visual references on mood boards and all that kind of stuff is definitely key.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So what are the things you're looking for when building a mood board? Is it like colors, textures? Like what for you makes a complete vision board?
It really has to do with, it all starts with the script. So, I think that I would not cast too wide of a net. I would generally it has to do, a lot of indies take place in a handful of sets or maybe one or two sets. So we'll focus on that specifically. And when we talk about, okay, it's a messy set, what does that look like? And so that helps narrow down those kinds of conversations. Or if there's a hero prop or a hero set piece, like a time machine or something like that, trying to figure out what those things are. So it's less about casting a wide net for these mood boards and trying to make some sort of synthesis of specific things that are being featured in this. At the same time, there's a big push for distinct visual styles in short films. Like the classic is Wes Anderson. Like everybody wants to try and do Wes Anderson. So that's going to end up on a lot of people's mood boards, which is helpful because that is very distinct. And so, I might pull that, but I'm not going to pull something out of Darjeeli Unlimited. I might pull something that's just like a screenshot of one of the sets that he has, and as far as like color palettes and all that kind of stuff. So it can be anything from like figuring out the color palette of a character and narrowing that down and have that be informed, or it can be, like I said, something that is specific to a hero prop or a hero set piece as well.
Okay. So what kind of things were on the Joyriders mood board? Do you remember?
Yeah, I definitely worked on it a lot. That was anytime I sent the script to somebody, I also sent the mood board for these things. So it had a lot to do with, it's aliens. So this is inspired by a lot of, 80s, 90s sci-fi adventures, stuff like Flight of the Navigator and things of that nature. So for me also, when you say alien, that can mean so many different things. So specifically, our project had things like Geiger from the designer of Aliens. That kind of black organic feel, but still had some sort of sense of order to it. And also it had things like close-ups of the coral reef or coral, to kind of give, or a beehive, an empty beehive where you could see the pockets of the honeycombs, or, a close-up of a leaf, kind of just seeing these patterns of texture that I wanted to put on the walls of this alien spaceship. And then we had other things where we built a miniature of the spaceship. So it also helps for me because I can just like grab a bunch of images from all over the place. And then once I have them in a file, I can start deleting images that I don't like. Or sometimes I'll take the tail of one spaceship and like Photoshop it onto another, and sometimes it is just a matter of having these images in front of you, printing them out, or just having them on your desktop and just staring at them for a while, or just leave them there and then start removing some of those things. Yeah, those kinds of things were mostly the things that I was looking for. Oh, and then the other thing, one element of the spaceship that we built, because we built the entire set, was I was trying to think about how to describe it and how I wanted to do it. And so I was looking at, traditional sci-fi spaceships and what have you, like Star Trek, Star Wars, all that stuff. And then it dawned on me that instead of trying to utilize all that space, the most analogous thing that we have now are submarines. So that have like a lot of texture on the walls and everything, with tubes and cranks and dials and all that kind of stuff. And also they're very claustrophobic, but they still feel lived in. and everything like that. So submarines were a big inspiration for our spaceship.
Very cool stuff. So let's talk about how you built it. Like what from the theater flats on, what went into actually putting together this submarine inspired, coral inspired spaceship, materials wise.
Yeah. So I realized that I wanted to make sure that the audience didn't have a clear vision of the full geography of the spaceship, meaning that I wasn't going to get any super wide shots of the spaceship at any point, or we're going to be shooting in the corners and all that kind of stuff, just because I didn't want to, we didn't have the full size that we wanted, obviously. So sure. I didn't want to have them feel like they knew how big or small the space was. And so it could potentially be endless. So we built I think it was 14 by 20, maybe a bit bigger on either side, set that was in this just relatively small soundstage with the cyc wall and everything like that. And we just got some theatrical flats. So I knew that we rented this space that we were going to shoot it on it, and we had a finite amount of time. And so through Seed and Spark, there were a lot of people who just were in our database at this point. I was like, all right, anybody who wants to just come out for a day and help, we're just going to raise this barn, put these flats up, and we'll go from there. So we had a couple dozen people come out on the day, which was great, spending a couple hours with us. And we got used flats donated from old shows and theater pieces and stuff, because we knew that we were going to be painting these flats. And also the big texture of the ship was the stuff that basically expanding insulation foam, the kind of stuff that you can find at any kind of hardware store, Home Depot. The brand name is Great Stuff. Basically just a spray, you spray it any kind of crack or whatever, and then after a couple of minutes, it expands into and hardens into foam. And so the idea, but we got an industrial sprayer of that stuff. So the idea was that we put up the flats, secure them all, put a roof on there, and then I would go in and just spray it all down with this industrial foam, let that dry overnight, and then come in the next morning and carve into the foam and paint the foam black. The other thing that I specifically wanted to do, and feel free to stop me because I'm rambling.
No,
but
hey, this is the nerd series that we're doing. For our craft series. Nerd out, dude. Like, get into it.
So one of the other things that I wanted to do was that I wanted, instead of making, a lot of sci-fi shows like Star Trek, it can be very clean. It can be very bright, which means that you can see all of the nooks and crannies and cracks of the project. So I wanted it to be dark, but not dark enough to where it's hard to see anything or it looks like a mistake or anything like that. So my idea was to have the base be this foam that was going to be darker tones, blacks and purples and dark blues washed all over it. And then I wanted to make sure that it was glossy. And the reason for the gloss is that the gloss would then catch the light and kind of dance that light around. So even if it was in the deep background, it wasn't just full black drop off to where it felt like nothing or they're behind a black void. You could still see texture, but you could see the texture from the crevices where the gloss kind of went over. So we did a couple of things to achieve that. We got, obviously all the paint was gloss, which is generally what you don't do when you're building sets for anything, because the DP will hate you, because they want to be able to control the light. So usually do matte. So we did gloss for all of our background paints. And then we got some silicone and just caulking silicone, stuff that you get at any hardware store. And caulking silicone, we got the clear stuff. If you've ever used it, it hardens, but it still has a level of texture to it. And it also is a little rubbery. So we basically just put a bunch in our hand and just like rubbing it all over the place, like Vaseline almost. And then it would harden. So it would have the feel of almost Vaseline, but it would be hard to touch. So it wasn't getting everywhere. So we'd use that, not over every surface, but particularly where we knew light was going to be hitting, just to kind of, like I said, help reflect the lights on that. And then from there, we also drilled holes into the set and backlit it and kind of covered it with basically like shower curtains. And so it had a level of light that felt organic, but still, like there's some sort of button or light source coming from the ship. My idea there was that I didn't want to have a lot of sources in the ship that we were constantly moving, light sources in the ship that we were constantly moving. I wanted the ship to be fully lit through 360 throughout the entire production, so we weren't moving lights around and all that kind of stuff, which obviously everybody knows is something that takes time. So that's why, like I said, we were cutting holes into the ship and then backlighting those holes, and put diffusion on those little holes, which could be actual diffusion or even, like I said, shower curtain. And we knew where the majority of the action was going to take place, so we were able to be strategic about those kinds of things.
You built a mini like cardboard version of the like ship console, right? Is that where you did a lot of your blocking? Like you built that out and like made your shot list based on the miniature, or?
I built the miniature, and I think it was like a 1-inch scale of the spaceship. That's what I was trying to do. 1-inch scale, meaning 1 inch for every 1 foot. Yeah. So I built that out of cardboard. That was partially just for the crew that we had coming in, for the arrangement of how we were going to build the flats, because we had such a limited time on that. So I did a little bit of storyboarding based on that, but not much. The boarding was, honestly, like, just because the ship was relatively small and everything, I only boarded the visual effects shot, the stuff that I knew was a little harder to explain. And also just the style of the film, I wanted it to be very grounded. So there's not a whole lot of like Steadicam shots or whatever. I wanted it to be very handheld, frenetic at times. So it wasn't a whole lot of use in boarding too much. And I also I wanted a lot of improv with these kids. I say kids, but they were young adults. They look like kids and they're playing kids, but yeah. So I wanted them to have the freedom to bounce around the set and to discover it too. So yeah, that was, like I said, I just mostly boarded the visual effects shots I knew that I was going to need.
Got it. And so obviously, especially if you're relying a little bit on improv and you have built a thing for them to interact with, how did you ensure that like the set pieces that they were allowed to interact with, buttons, levers, that kind of stuff, like didn't fall apart on them if, they unexpectedly grabbed something, but were also still coming in like under budget? Obviously, you couldn't build a working interior spaceship. So like, how did you balance not making it look cheap, but making it durable enough that they could interact?
It had to do with, I knew what they were going to interact with. Okay. There are definitely things in there that if they had touched them or leaned up against them, it wouldn't have fallen apart, or they would have fell through.
So there were no zones on the ship?
There were definitely no zones. There were yes-no zones. Yeah, there were definitely places where it was like, yeah, touch that, don't touch that. So yeah, once you know that, then you can just bake it into the system. And also, like, these are the durability of it. It's not like theater where the thing has to last for multiple productions. It just needs to last for the day that it's being shot and the shot that they're touching it for. So there was a level of ease on that. But the thing that they moved the most were the controllers for how they flew the ship. I wanted those, strong enough to where they could yank them around and all that kind of stuff throughout. So we spent more time building and designing the flight console more than anything else.
What was that made out of?
So I'll just try and visually describe them. I wanted them to be unique in how most alien spaceships or spaceships in general controlled. The idea being that this is an alien that is multi-armed alien that can grab different things themselves, kind of like an octopus. But because of that, these 3 kids needed to work together to operate this ship. So there's 2 main controllers on either side, which kind of looks like a bicycle handle connected to like a spinal vertebrae almost that goes out of the ground and go up. So it basically makes a big L with a handle at the end of it. And that's on one side and mirrored on the other side. And then the centerpiece, there is a large black bulb that is covered in this organic goo. It kind of looks like almost looks like a tumor actually, with light coming out of it. And so that was connected to a piece of PVC that was embedded into the ground. with a spring in the center of it and a light shining underneath the PVC into the bulb. And I poked holes in the bulb and into the PVC, so it would kind of have this glow. And that was a multicolored LED bulb, so it could change colors and everything like that. So because of the spring inside of it, the actor could just grab it and like a basketball basically and just move it around as if she's almost massaging it. And that's kind of how the ship works. Yeah, I think it gave a pretty good effect to it.
No, it totally did. It made me think of the Cylon ships in Battlestar Galactica when they have to fly the ones that are like run by the pseudo organic Cylons and like have to like put their hands in like their guts and like figure out their neural pathways and stuff.
Yeah.
That's always what it made me think of.
Yeah, no, I definitely wanted to feel gross.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
So do you think that there are any misconceptions that indie or mainstream film people have about the production design department, the art design department, things that you've run into where you're like, how do you think that? What?
It's funny. If you don't build, I realize that like we grew up in an era where people would fix things. And not to sound too much like an old fuddy-duddy, but like if you had a Walkman or a tape recorder and it stopped working, you might take a screwdriver and like try and get the tape out and, or blow in it, or your video games you blew in and try to clean it out with a Q-tip or something like that, or just take it off to see if, the fan's working or something like that. And people don't really have that mentality anymore. And there's also we do live in a magical era of 3D printers and just alchemy with technology where it feels like you can make anything. So if there are elements where I am just fascinated when people are asking for something, and it's like, you do know people make that. That's not just, elves making these at night. Like these things take time. That's the whole expression, cheap, fast, and good, but you only get two.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think that the time that certain things take is always surprising to me. So I would say that any advice that I would give is that if you did have a project that had like a really cool prop or a really cool set piece or costume or what have you, spend the time on that. Focus on that and don't expect that to be turned out overnight, because if it is, it's probably not going to be any good.
Right.
In fact, the consoles for how the spaceships were controlled, those were specifically given to two people, and that's all they did on my short film was just build those things. And they had the time to do those things, and they came out looking great. And I didn't have to think about them once I gave them over. I was able to do other things, and they weren't getting pulled into doing other things, and they didn't feel like their time was being abused or whatever. They just got to do this cool thing that they were really excited about. So I think that when you're delegating your workspace, it's entirely possible to just like have one person do that one thing, your hero prop or set piece or costume piece, and have them just focus on that.
Yeah, I definitely will say when I was new to film, it was surprising to me how many people were like made up the art department, especially on sci-fi or horror. Some people would, how delegated things could get was surprising to me. Like, yeah, this person is exclusively in charge of the console. This person is exclusively in charge of like these two props. They are the daddy of these props. They are the ones you go to if you need these two props. But it makes sense when you really think about it, because how can one person possibly keep track of all of those things and be responsible for maintaining all of those things?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What are some tricks that you've learned over the course of this, knowing that some people underestimate how much time it takes, certainly how much money it takes, that you have used to like not fake your budget, but like basically what are some tricks that you have learned to stretch your budget further than it maybe should have been stretched and still make something great?
I think that the best thing you can do for your budget in regards to art department is make your art department intentional from the beginning. Meaning that if you are thinking about the look of it and what the art department is going to be doing and all that kind of stuff, as you are writing the script, then it's kind of like your visual effects. If you are an independent filmmaker, you are probably thinking about your visual effects in a very minimalist kind of way, a very intentional kind of way. You hopefully are anyway. You're not just writing all willy-nilly and not knowing how you're going to achieve anything. So I think if you are able to think about them from the beginning and think about like actually what this stuff might look like and how it might feel. And then also like, I just had a friend of mine who's making a short film and she's still in the script process. And she called me up and be like, hey, I have an idea for this thing. How would I do it? And we kind of talked through it. And she's going to be able to put it in her film because she was talking about it. If we had talked through it and I was like, don't even think about that, that's crazy, she would probably not put it in there. So I think that just on the script level.
Don't write yourself into a corner before you know it's achievable.
Exactly.
Are there other like more tactile like shortcuts that you've found? So like obviously the insulation foam is a really cool way of adding texture with, pretty quickly. But like, are there other things that you've learned that like, hey, if you use this, you can substitute for a more expensive thing?
I think that the main thing I do is modify as opposed to build. So if you have a piece, so a lot of the things that the kids were touching in the spaceship, where they had a whole montage where they're trying to fix the ship and they're just like turning knobs and all that kind of stuff. I went to the thrift store and bought a bunch of old toys and mechanical toys and took them apart. I used the guts of these toys, or I used the head of a little bop it thing and just used the core of it, and I painted that. And then I added some servos and different kind of gack on top of that, glued that together. So I think it's more, I would think of your art department, especially in the genre space, as more collage art than fabrication art, or like creating it from the scratch. It seems kind of obvious, but so much of what we do is just trying to see how to create something from something that already exists. That's always going to be the easier way for you to go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, as someone who is not as like visually inclined when it comes to projects, but who can appreciate it, I'm always curious how you manage to sort of like thread the needle between, something looking like genuinely futuristic or like real versus painting a toy from a thrift shop. Like how are you making sure that you're ending up on like inventive and complicated when in fact it's like a wheel from a toy and something like that? Like how are you making sure that it doesn't look like what it actually is beyond paint, I guess?
A lot of it has to do with how it's being shot too.
Oh, okay.
This is what I'm talking about, like getting these conversations in from the beginning. So going back to our set, we use a lot of the Astero light tubes, which are these color changing tubes that you can control on your iPad or your iPhone or what have you. And they're used in music videos. Anytime you see a light tube in the set, it's these tubes. So that part of that is because we wanted to control where we were putting our focus on, and also have those light pieces be a part of the set. And that's what's drawing the eye and making lens flares and all that kind of stuff to mask the cheapness, frankly, of our set. So, I think that a lot of what you do, as far as if you have a set that you really love, but it's not going to look the way you want it to, you can work with your DP about where the light is going to be focusing on. Maybe it's darker in one corner or another, or maybe, like I said, you aren't shooting these big wide shots. You are making it more confined. Or if there is a wide shot, maybe that wide shot is only in a relatively small area. In regards to like props, maybe if it is a piece, some sort of sci-fi prop or what have you, you don't see it that much, or you just see it for a second, or something to that effect. So I think that is how we see a thing is important. And also like just leaning into that aesthetic, if it looks cheap, but it looks like it's intentionally cheap, then your audience buys that. If you set a tone for your film that allows a certain kind of look, then you're going to be able to get away with things more easily than that, So
Sure.
I think you just have to let your audience know what kind of movie you're watching and what kind of movie they're watching, and then go from there.
That makes sense. I will also say weight is a big thing that we didn't consider a lot. My first project was like a zombie apocalypse project, and we had a lot of fake weaponry. And the thing that always looked the most fake was not the fact that it was a plastic machete, but the fact that it was like a weightless machete. And so something we had to do a lot was figure out ways to like either literally weight the object so that the actor looked like they were holding something real, or have to like be really conscious about the way we were moving it to make it appear like it held more weight. Because I think a weightless thing like, the coffee cup that everyone hates in TV shows where there's obviously no liquid in the cup, people can tell that kind of stuff. So weight and the appearance of weight, I've found, is a big element of making something look quote unquote realistic.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also like, I think that I can always tell aged paint or aged makeup where it's like this wall or this prop has just, it's supposed to look old, but really it just has like some paint on it. So making sure that when you are aging something that it blends well, things of that nature. I think that the hardest thing to do is make something look that makes something look good that has a lot of straight edges, straight lines, trying to make a realistic cell phone or communication device or something like that has, you look at your Apple products or what have you, they're all like very sleek, very clean and all that kind of stuff. Or a futuristic motorcycle, like very sleek, very clean. It can be very difficult. And so having a little bit more chaos and a little more intentionality within that helps blend and helps us understand. It helps us realize that it's real, but it also doesn't look as fake because your eyes aren't focusing on this like single monolith or these clean edges and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. It also is probably helpful when you have a like comprehensive aesthetic where it's not like there's one element that's like a little chaotic and more curvy and then everything else is sleek. It's like commit to your aesthetic, make everything match this style, and then it looks like a style rather than they just didn't have this one thing.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And that makes sense going all the way back to the script and your mood boards and making sure everything's consistent.
Yeah, I mean,
planning.
Absolutely.
Hey, people, plan.
And I think that as a director, I think, especially if you don't have an eye, I think you have to embrace your creatives that you are bringing on. And so, in saying yes and to a lot of things, or just being like, that's not what I originally had in mind, but we can do it because it looks cool, or I think that you're telling me that that's achievable, which what I had in mind is not, or what I had in mind is achievable, but would look like shit. And so being able to have that flexibility and if you are able to get a talented person involved, letting go of any other kind of idea that you had, and just let them have fun with it. Because, if I'm working on an indie project and there's a specific thing that we want to do, it's more difficult if I'm trying to recreate this very specific thing that the director had in mind from the beginning and had sketches and designs and all that kind of stuff. Because I might not have the resources or even ability to like make this photorealistic thing that they have in mind. The better idea is to say, all right, what do I have and what can I do, and give you options based on that, as opposed to this thing that you had in mind that may not be the end all be all or that important to the story. So yeah, just finding those compromises and those collaborative moments with your designer is very important.
Yeah. And I think that's something that comes up a lot in conversations with crew where, especially when you're talking about like a writer director, they get so married to the idea in their head that they forget that just because it's their idea and their story doesn't mean it's the right idea. And a lot of times people get so wrapped up in like their original idea that they forget that a different idea, even if it fundamentally changes like the foundation for them, actually can go somewhere. Like there's a lot of like, I feel like pearl clutching of, no, this is the original idea. We have to stick to this. Otherwise the story doesn't make sense. And it's like, really? Or can we change one line of dialogue and it's actually fine? So letting go and trusting your team, I think, is a good takeaway for not just this conversation, but a lot of conversations we tend to have on this podcast.
Yeah.
Right. I think that on the indie level, full collaboration is required. There's nothing worse than being on the indie level and having a director that is too married to their ideas and not willing to budge, because then it's like, well, why didn't you just do it yourself? Or
Yeah,
you can't afford to do it that way. So yeah.
totally. Yeah, I'm actually in early development for my next feature, which is a creature feature. And so this like whole conversation has really been exciting for me because that's kind of on my mind. But I'm not at the point where I'm like, I have the funding in place and I'm crewing up yet. And so I'm sort of avoiding trying to design too much on my own, because I really do want that collaborator who has that skill set and like will bring their own creativity to it and sort of take what I see in my head and also bring in their own thing, and we'll create something together.
But at the same time, I wouldn't say that you could do your own. If you feel like you do design or you have an ability to, I think that it's valuable, because then it gives people a sense of what direction to go. You know, even if you do have like a full design that you like, you can be like, it's very informative, because there's also the inverse, which is, I don't want a director that has no idea where they're going or just wants me to do all the heavy lifting on that kind of stuff. So if you have, and it also excites people, if you have just a really badass design, or if you just know somebody who just like is a good artist, has no like fabrication skills, but just like sketches really cool, and you're just inspired by their work, you'd be like, yo, can you get like just whip together like this monster? And that's going to be my calling card, because then people have an idea of like what you are reaching for, even if you don't eventually achieve it. And it also excites people. You know, it excites people about the project itself, because this is what we're trying to do. And then knowing that the eventual outcome will have a lot of flexibility and just be able to like go down a whole different rabbit hole. But I think that, yeah, the idea of you're not just selling somebody on your script, you're selling somebody on the cinematic experience. At the end of the day, people just want to work on cool shit. So
Totally, yeah.
So what would you tell Christina to put on her Pinterest board, Raymond?
Well, I will say I do have a mood board already, and I do have a lot of like, it's more of this and not this.
Yeah.
And I do have monsters from specific movies that are like, this is the direction and not this direction.
Yeah.
But I have been hesitant to like, wait, I was thinking about that. Like, do I hire someone to sketch out a monster for me? Or will I get too married to that and then find out I can't quite do that? You know, that's kind of been my fear there.
I mean, look, I think that's a personal question.
Yeah.
I would say that I think the value of having an original monster, if it feels truly original, if you are actually able to collaborate with a sketch artist or a 3D designer, whoever you come out with, and be like, this is something that's really cool, then like I said, it excites other people. And then it's up to you to know that is not, you might get a percentage you might get 50% of that, you know, or you might be able to realize that you can achieve that and just shoot it in darkness, or shoot it just a portion of it, or, you know, all that kind of stuff. So rarely do we see the monsters that we truly love. We rarely see them in full body.
Totally.
It's only in the posters or in the, you know, that one shot that we actually see them.
Yeah, I feel like a great example is in Alien, which is one of my favorite movies, how the alien looks so awesome when you get these tight shots, but then there's that one shot at the end when it's walking across the room.
Yeah.
And it just looks so ridiculous. You like that comparison.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just a guy in a suit at that point.
I always find that charming. I like it when I can tell that it's just a guy in a suit. I'm like, oh, I bet that took a long time to get into makeup today. I hope he was able to go to the bathroom first. So I'm glad that this came up because this is definitely a piece of your expertise, which is on-set practical effects and marrying practical and visual effects still on the budget. So what are some advice that you have about like doing as much as you can practically while also still being safe and still making sure that it like looks awesome?
Yeah, I think that I'm really interested in blending visual effects and practical effects, and I think everybody is right now. That's a big portion of it. So, having a visual effects artist that is somebody that's going to follow through, and because that's ultimately where a lot of these projects go to die. Independent films is just in the visual effects or in the edit, just because there's momentum when you're shooting with a bunch of friends, but then when you have just one guy who's doing you a favor over the course of like a couple months, and it's just that favor becomes a chore. So I think that being strategic about all of those blending moments, and not if you have a creature whose eyes glow, and that's a visual effects thing, you don't want to just shoot that all willy nilly. You want to make sure that you are maximizing those shots and being strategic about those shots. As far as like practical effects on set, I'm a big safety nerd. As messy and clumsy as I am, I'm definitely very aware of safety. So that's someplace that we don't cut corners, just because I've been around too many injuries on set. So yeah, you definitely have to take your time on that space, which is, time is the biggest commodity that we can afford on these projects. And then, yeah, like just things like fire and explosions are just not necessary anymore in these sets. You can really just do so much of that with like even the simplest visual effects. If you have zero visual effects experience, you can do a YouTube tutorial and make a fire appear in a place like with these. So yeah, just don't take chances. Like we take a lot of chances in indie film regularly, but safety is not one of those places you need to take those chances with.
Yeah, I think that's important. Sometimes there are no corners to cut. Sometimes you just got to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the folks who maybe aren't able to either find a great production designer in their area or just can't afford one, what are some things that you think more indie people on genre and beyond should really be thinking about when they're setting up a frame? Like, what are the production design elements that you see people missing that would not be hard to incorporate?
I think it has to do with you have to decide what element of realism you are trying to achieve.
Okay.
And I think that is so these are just choices that you have to make, before anything else. Is like, what is the tone and what are we trying to achieve here? Is it camp or is it, photorealistic? And then you have to lean into either of those. You can't, I would suggest not being subtle or second guessing or even asking those questions, making sure you ask those questions well in advance, so everybody's on the same page, so that if you don't have a production designer, you can communicate to your PA or your art PA, whoever is helping you out, what you're trying to achieve based on that kind of information. So yeah, I think that it's just a matter of you spending more time in trying to get an idea of what you're trying to achieve. And if you don't have a production designer or can't afford one, you can just find one of your crafty friends and be like, all right, you've leveled up. You're the production designer. This is what I want. And people will surprise you because, creativity is not an exclusive thing. It's a human, where it's embedded into all human nature.
It's not industry specific. If you're a creative person in one way, you're probably going to be creative in another.
Yeah. I also think that creativity is not exclusive to anybody. I think that it is a nature, not a nurture thing. For me, I believe everybody has the ability, even those who say I'm not creative or I have no creativity. It's like, if you actually ask them what does a room look like, they can figure that out. So yeah, and at the same time, I think that you can encourage people to try and envision the internet is everywhere, So if you're trying to design a young girl's bedroom, trying to turn your bedroom into a teenage girl's bedroom, you can Google teenage girl's bedroom and just recreate that, Google
Yeah.
images are going to be your best friend. So if you're not trying to make something that is wildly exotic, I think that there's no excuse anymore.
That's a great point. Yeah, I will say I'm asking this question a lot from the perspective of when I teach like intro to short film, intro to web series, a thing that I see a lot from students is like they just film people against a blank white wall, or like at most they'll put a poster up, and it's like, okay, can we think of anything more interesting than this? So something I try to emphasize is like adding depth to the frame. Like even if you're not doing a lot differently with the room than how it was originally, like just pull the couch away from the wall, set us in the middle of the room with the couch in the background, not like directly up against it, adding texture, so things to shelves versus just flat posters, stuff like that, trying to be conscious of what am I looking at versus, we're in a room. It's like, okay, cool. We all know that we're in a room when you started filming. So like, what else can that give us? What about this room is unique? Googling teenage girl bedroom, like what are elements of that and what do they tell us about the characters? I think that a lot of people just consider their space as it's a living room. That's what I need. It's like, well, but whose living room is it? And what does that tell us about the relationship between these characters and what they prioritize and things like that? So that's definitely the perspective I'm coming to this conversation with, is like, how do I explain to students that like the space matters?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, having it be embedded into the character is another very important element, and having that baked into the system as well. You can have, even in in the script stage, having descriptive elements about the set that they are in, spending a little more time in the action section, saying what the actual set looks like, what the room looks like, all that kind of stuff, so that if you were spending time on that in the script phase, that will help articulate that visually. And also, like I said, if you have somebody there's a department head who doesn't have a lot of experience, if you are being specific on the script level, that will help them a lot too.
Yeah, I like grounding it in character. Like if you go to somebody's house and look around, it tells you a lot about them. Like when you go to your friend's house or when you're Zooming with your friend and you can see into the background of their bedroom, like what does what you're seeing tell you about this person? Are they neat or sloppy? Do they like a lot of color? Are they one of those people that like frames everything or just sort of haphazardly like push pins things to the walls? Like all of those elements make up who this person is and tell a different visual story. So don't forget about that aspect of characterization when you're building your world.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. Well, Christina, did you have any other high-level questions?
No questions, but I've really enjoyed listening to
it's such a fun conversation, Raymond.
Yeah, I love it.
Any final advice that you have for the indie filmmakers in our audience about production design, about anything?
I always just say that you got to just do it. So if you do have a project that you've just been sitting on for years and years and you're just waiting for it, because if you spend too much time waiting for the perfect moment to make this thing happen, then it puts way too much pressure on that specific project, especially if you're new to it and haven't done a film or haven't done many short films. You got to have that time to let the project live and then die and suck and regrets and all that kind of stuff, so that you can go through that process again. You're trying to make a film career, not just trying to make a film. And so much of a career, it has ebbs and flows. So just get out there and burn it and move on to the next one.
I love that. So what's next for you? You mentioned that Joyriders is kind of finishing up its festival run. So what's next for Joyriders? What's next for you? We're
trying to do the feature route. We had some buzz with the Sterable Film Festival, which is specifically for pilots and everything, and obviously that's a bigger mountain to climb. So we are moving towards the feature range there and working on a script for that. We're also, ironically enough, going into the podcast space, doing narrative podcasts that we've been developing that are in the horror genre there. And then I have some children's stories, children's television programs that we're developing right now too. So trying to get that off the ground. So yeah, a couple of different things lying around.
So when you say we, you're saying like your production company or?
Yeah, I mean, it's catch-all because each of these projects has a couple of different partners, people I'm collaborating with. So it's the royal we, I guess.
Sure.
So, but like anything I do, I can't do it by myself. I'm always working with other people. So yeah, we're still pushing along.
Well, amazing.
Cool.
Well, we will definitely add links and everything to the episode notes so people can follow up with you. But thank you so much again, Raymond, for joining us and nerding out about art with us, art and
Yeah,
creatures.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, Ezra Lee for editing this episode, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them and our guest are in our episode description.
And thank you to our booby VIPs, who are our $10 supporters on Patreon. That's Kim Garland, Amanda Blunt, Anthony Epp, Kelsey Rauber, Norman Steinberg, and Brandy Nicole Payne. If you want your name on that list and or you want to have access to all of our bonus resources related to each and every podcast episode we post for free, you can subscribe for as little as $3 to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod.
Or join our free newsletter where we share a new creative prompt each month. Next episode, we'll be discussing the craft of voiceover acting with special guest Edward Hong. Be sure to tune in.